Now, whenever someone says that you have a slip disc, they are referring to one of these two, okay? And this is why a slip disc as a term is completely inaccurate and it doesn't really mean anything, because the disc itself doesn't really slip out. So it can pop out like this. Okay, so you can see how the purple is essentially the membrane of the disc itself, whereas the blue is the actual liquid that is located inside the disc. So this liquid that's here is there to essentially provide the cushioning and the shock absorption for the discs, because that's what they're there for. A disc itself is not going to just slip out of in between the vertebrae. It doesn't work like that, okay? It's impossible. So this is where we're kind of breaking that myth. So I want you to completely forget about the term slip disc, and I want you to focus on these two conditions here. So you've got a bulging disc that essentially, you've got some of the liquid that's trying to essentially protrude through the membrane of the disc, but it cannot, because the disc is still strong enough to hold the liquid inside. And for those of you who are interested in knowing like what the names of these different kind of colors are, obviously this is the annulus fibrosis, which is essentially the membrane. So the purple bit is the membrane that protects the fluid that's inside the membrane. And the fluid itself is something called the nucleus pulposus, which is essentially the fluid that I said a couple of seconds ago that provides that shock absorption and the mobility of the intervertebral spaces. A slip disc doesn't relate to any one of these. So we're just going to throw that term out the window and we're never going to use it again because it's confusing. So it's either going to be a bulging disc or it's either going to be a herniated disc. Okay, there's no middle ground. Now, when it comes to a bulging disc, you can have symptoms such as like pins and needles down the arm. If the disc is in the neck, so if you're talking about like cervical bulge up here into the neck or in the thoracic area, you're going to be feeling a lot of sensations down into the fingers, loss of sensation into the muscles here, maybe like a burning sensation, pain radiating down. But if you got a herniated disc, imagine those previous symptoms that I've just mentioned and multiply them by 10, because a herniated disc is going to be compressing onto the spinal cord. This is where we're going to come back to the anatomy chart. I'm going to add the nerves here, and I want you to see what happens. So the yellow bit is the nerve root, okay? So now imagine where the nerve root is there, and you've got a bit of a bulge. So let's just say you've got a bulge kind of pushing onto the nerve there, and then you're going to get those kind of symptoms that I've mentioned a couple of seconds ago. They're not going to be massive depending on how big the bulge is, of course. They could be different sizes. But if you've got like a regular, like the average bulge, let's just say, on the average person that has a bulging disc, you're going to be getting those like symptoms of the burning sensation down into the fingers, depending on which nerve you're dealing with. So let's just try and essentially recreate what a bulge and a herniation would look like. So let's just say that you got a bulge here. That's so that if the disc is there, then you got like a little bit of a bulge that's compressing onto the nerve root, and that's sending those signals down the arm. But then if you got a herniation, there will be a spillage of the nucleus pulposus, which is the fluid inside the annulus fibrosis, which is the membrane. So this will be the difference, okay? So this is why a herniation is going to be so much more worse than a bulge, and then the symptoms will be a lot more obvious. Okay, so the thing is that if you've got a bulge, you could potentially, misdiagnose yourself with symptoms of a bulge, because you might be struggling from like muscle tightness, because it's very common for the muscles to compress on the nerves, and that could then send signals down into the fingers or into the arm, and it can essentially recreate the symptoms of a bulge. But if you got a herniation, there is nothing that is going to recreate those symptoms on a muscular basis, and the only kind of solution there will be to obviously get a scan, because that is the truest way to essentially get a read on what's going on.